I walked in and found my wife kneeling in front of my sister's husband just a few hours before family dinner. I did not make a sound. I just stood there, watching. They didn't even notice me. My hand was already reaching for my phone when something inside me said wait. So I waited. I counted to 10 in my head. Then I pulled out my phone and FaceTimed my sister. The ringtone echoed through the house. Not from somewhere far away. From the corner of the bedroom. My sister was sitting in the armchair by the window, legs crossed, watching everything like it was a movie. She looked at her phone, then looked at me standing in the doorway, and her face didn't even change. She said, "Jake, you need to know something." That was the moment my life split into before and after. Let me back up a few hours. That morning started like any Tuesday in April. I was a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm in Fort Worth, Texas. I'd been there 11 years. I wasn't the flashiest guy on the team, but I delivered every project on time or under budget. While the other managers leased BMWs and rented downtown lofts, I drove a 7-year-old F-150 and lived in a 3-bedroom house in Arlington that my wife and I bought when rates were dirt cheap. I maxed out my 401k every year. I had a brokerage account that would make my coworkers' jaws drop if they ever saw the balance. Nobody knew. I liked it that way. My boss, Dale Whitmore, called me into his office around 10 that morning. He didn't offer me coffee, which was the first bad sign. Dale always offered coffee when the conversation was going to be friendly. He told me the company was restructuring. 3 project managers had to go. He said he picked me because, and I quote, "I had the financial cushion to land on my feet." He said Marcus in the next office had 2 car payments and a mortgage he could barely afford. He said Trina was a single mom. He said cutting me was the humane choice. I sat there trying to understand how being responsible with money had become a fireable offense. Dale shook my hand and told me to clear out by noon. I packed my desk in 20 minutes. Nobody said goodbye. I drove home with a box of personal items on the passenger seat and a strange calm in my chest. I wasn't panicking. I had almost $2 million across various accounts. My wife had a good salary as an office manager at a dental practice. We'd be fine. I just needed to sit down with her, lay out a plan, and maybe finally pull the trigger on the consulting business I'd been sketching out for years. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw my brother-in-law's truck. Rob drove a silver Silverado with custom rims that cost more than my monthly mortgage. He and my sister Karen had been married for 8 years. We did Sunday dinners together. Our kids played in the same backyard. I figured Karen had dropped by to visit my wife Emma while Rob was running errands. No big deal. I walked in through the garage. The downstairs was empty. The TV was off. No voices in the kitchen. I set my box on the counter and headed upstairs, because I heard the floorboards creak. That's when I found them. I've replayed that image 1,000 times. My wife, my brother-in-law, and my sister sitting in the corner like she was supervising. 3 people I trusted more than anyone on this earth, and they had built a separate world behind my back. Karen spoke first. She said they'd been wanting to tell me. She said it started 2 years ago. She said it wasn't what I thought. She said the word arrangement. She said they loved me and wanted me to be part of it. She said tonight at dinner, after the kids were in bed, they were going to bring it up over wine. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. My hands weren't even shaking. Something had switched off inside me, like a circuit breaker tripping to protect the wiring. I looked at Emma. She was pulling on a robe and talking fast, saying, "Baby, please, just listen. We can explain. This is actually beautiful if you open your mind to it." Rob had the decency to look uncomfortable, but he wasn't apologizing. He was just standing there like a man waiting for a meeting to resume. I said I needed to get something from my truck. Emma grabbed my arm and said, "Don't leave." I gently removed her hand. I walked downstairs. I grabbed my laptop bag, my wallet, and the emergency cash I kept in a lockbox in the garage. $1,400. I got in my truck and started the engine. Emma came running out in her robe. I backed out of the driveway. She stood in the street calling my name. I drove away. For the next 6 hours, I just drove. West on I-20, then northwest on smaller highways. I didn't have a destination. I just needed the road to keep moving under me so my mind wouldn't catch up. Somewhere past Abilene, the sun went down. Somewhere past Lubbock, I stopped for gas. I paid cash. I turned off my phone. I kept going. Around 2 in the morning, I crossed into New Mexico. The landscape turned flat and empty under a sky so full of stars it looked fake. I pulled off at a town called Tucumcari. Population maybe 5,000. I parked at a truck stop and slept in my cab until sunrise. When I woke up, I sat in the parking lot drinking gas station coffee and forcing myself to think clearly. I needed a lawyer. I needed to protect my money. I needed to not do anything stupid. I turned my phone on long enough to call my attorney back in Fort Worth. Gerald Wu picked up on the second ring even though it was barely 7. I told him what happened. I told him to freeze Megan out of my accounts. I told him to start moving assets to protected structures. Gerald said he'd have everything in motion by end of day. I told him to set up an automatic transfer of $1,500 a month to Emma's account for household expenses. I wasn't going to let my kids' home fall apart just because their mother destroyed our marriage. Then I called my mom. I told her Emma and I were separating. I told her I was taking some time away. She started asking questions and I said, "Mom, I love you. I'll explain everything later. I just need you to know I'm safe." I hung up before she could argue. I had 2 kids. Tyler was 7 and Lily was 5. Thinking about them was the only thing that made my chest feel like it was caving in. I told myself I'd come back for them. But I couldn't face Emma right now. I couldn't face Karen. I couldn't sit across from Rob at a table and pretend the world still made sense. I kept driving west. The landscape changed. Desert gave way to mountains. I passed through Albuquerque without stopping. By late afternoon, I was climbing into the mountains north of Santa Fe. My low fuel light came on near a town called Peñasco, tucked into a valley at 7,000 feet. The air was thin and cold, and smelled like pine and wood smoke. I filled up at a gas station attached to a small general store. The woman behind the counter looked at my Texas plates and my dress shoes and said, "Long way from home, aren't you?" I asked if there was any work around here. She laughed. "Honey, there's always work if you don't mind getting dirty. The ski resorts are closed for the season, but the ranches are hiring for spring. You ever worked with your hands?" I'd managed construction projects for 11 years. I'd never actually built anything myself, but I knew lumber, I knew foundations. I knew how buildings went together even if I'd always been the one holding the clipboard. I told her I could learn. She pointed me toward a man named Hector Gallegos, who ran a cattle and timber operation about 15 miles up a dirt road. She said Hector's son had just left for the army, and he needed help through the summer. She called him while I stood there. 20 minutes later, I was bouncing up a mountain road in my F-150, following hand-drawn directions on a napkin. Hector was a 62-year-old man built like a fence post, lean and hard and weathered. He had a handshake that could crack walnuts. He looked at me like he was reading my entire life story off my face. He asked me 3 questions. Can you wake up before sunrise? Can you take orders without complaining? Are you running from the law? I said yes, yes, and no. He said good enough, and showed me to a small cabin behind the main house. The cabin had a wood stove, a cot, a table, and a view of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains that looked like a painting. Hector's wife Rosa brought me a plate of enchiladas that night and a stack of blankets because the nights still dropped below freezing at that altitude. I ate alone, looking out the window at mountains I couldn't name, and for the first time since walking into that bedroom, I felt something that wasn't rage or numbness. It felt like the beginning of breathing again. The next 3 months broke me and rebuilt me. Hector started me on fence work. Miles of barbed wire strung across mountain terrain, through creek beds, and over ridgelines. My hands bled for the first 2 weeks until the calluses formed. Then came the cattle work. Hector ran about 400 head of mixed breed on 3,000 acres of mountain pasture. I learned to ride a horse properly from his foreman, a quiet Navajo man named Dean who only spoke when he had something worth saying. Dean taught me to rope, to read animal behavior, to move through rough country without fighting it. He said the mountains would teach me patience if I let them. I learned to use a chainsaw. Hector had a timber permit, and we spent weeks felling dead ponderosa pines for firewood and building materials. The physical work consumed me. Every night I fell into that cot so exhausted that my mind couldn't wander back to Emma and Rob and Karen. My body changed. I dropped 15 pounds of office weight and replaced it with something harder. The altitude leaned me out. The sun darkened my skin. I grew a full beard because shaving seemed pointless up here. By June, the man in the small mirror above the cabin sink looked nothing like the project manager who'd walked out of a Fort Worth office 3 months earlier. I kept in minimal contact with Gerald. He told me Emma was frantic. She'd filed a missing person report, which the police dismissed after Gerald confirmed I was alive and had left voluntarily. She called my parents daily. She called Gerald weekly. She never mentioned divorce. She kept saying she wanted to explain. Gerald also told me that Karen had called him once, crying, saying the whole thing was her idea and she was sorry. I told Gerald I didn't care whose idea it was. What I did care about was my kids. I set up a prepaid phone and called my parents' house at times when I knew Tyler and Lily would be there. My mom had been keeping them more and more. Emma's work schedule had apparently gotten hectic, or maybe she was spending time with her arrangement. I didn't ask. I just talked to my kids. Tyler told me about his baseball team. Lily sang me a song she learned at school. I told them Daddy was working on a ranch in the mountains and I'd see them soon. Every time I hung up, I sat on the cabin steps and stared at the peaks until the ache passed. In July, Hector told me some people had been asking about a man from Texas. A woman and 2 others had shown up at the general store in Peñasco. The woman said she was looking for her husband. The store owner said she didn't know anyone matching that description. Hector told me the whole valley would give me the same protection. People up here respected privacy the way city people respected personal space. They'd been burned enough by outsiders to know the value of keeping quiet. I decided to keep moving. Hector understood. He paid me in cash and I settled up with a handshake. I'd already bought a used horse from a neighbor and a pack mule from Hector himself. Dean gave me a saddle and a set of panniers. I packed light. Tent, sleeping bag, cook kit, laptop wrapped in a dry bag, solar charger, my tools, a lever-action rifle in, 30-30 for bears and mountain lions, a .357 revolver on my hip. I looked like someone who'd fallen through a time portal from 1885. I rode north into the Carson National Forest. For 3 weeks, I moved through high country that most people only see from a car window. I camped by streams. I fished for trout. I worked odd jobs at remote ranches, fixing fences, helping with haying, doing carpentry. Word traveled through the mountain communities faster than I expected. People started calling me Tex, which I preferred to anyone using my real name. A rancher near Chama told me Hector had spread the word across 4 counties. Tex is good people. Help him if you can. Near the Colorado border, I camped at a trailhead and walked into a small town for supplies. I was sitting in a diner eating a green child cheeseburger when I heard a voice that made every muscle in my body lock up. Emma was in the booth behind me. She was talking to Karen. I could hear every word through the thin partition. Someone in Peñasco said they saw a guy matching his description heading north on horseback. On horseback, Karen. Has he lost his mind? Maybe he's having some kind of breakdown. We should have handled it differently. I should have talked to him first, alone. I don't care about should've anymore. I just need him to come home. Tyler keeps asking when Daddy's coming back. I don't know what to tell him. What about the papers Gerald sent? I'm not signing those. He's confused. Once he sees me, once we actually talk face to face without him running away, he'll understand. I sat completely still. My beard was thick. My hair was past my ears and curled from the dry mountain air. I was wearing a battered cowboy hat, a faded denim jacket, and boots caked with mud. I weighed 30 pounds different than the last time Emma saw me. When the waitress came to refill my coffee, she called me on and didn't look twice. Emma and Karen got up and walked right past my booth. Emma's eyes passed over me and kept going. She didn't even slow down. My own wife looked at me and saw a stranger. I sat there for a long time after they left. Then I paid my bill, walked back to my camp, and made a decision. I was done running. Not because I was ready to forgive, but because I was ready to fight. I called Gerald and told him to file the divorce papers in New Mexico. I'd established residency. Gerald said Emma would contest jurisdiction, but we had a strong case. I told him I wanted full documentation of everything. Bank records showing my savings predated the marriage, evidence of the affair, timeline of my financial support since leaving. I told him to hire a private investigator if needed. Gerald said he already had. 3 weeks later, I was back in Fort Worth for the first hearing. I showed up in a clean Western shirt, pressed jeans, and boots. My beard was trimmed. My hair was pulled back. I looked like a different species from the man who'd left that office in April. Emma saw me in the courthouse hallway and stopped walking. She stared for a full 10 seconds before her hand went to her mouth. Rob and Karen were behind her. Rob didn't recognize me at all until Karen grabbed his arm and whispered. The color drained out of his face. I walked past all 3 of them without a word and went into the courtroom. The hearing was straightforward. Emma's attorney tried to paint me as an abandoner. My attorney presented the evidence. 2 years of deception. My sister and brother-in-law as co-conspirators. The fact that I had maintained financial support for my children the entire time I was gone. Emma tried to speak directly to me twice. The judge told her to address the court. The judge awarded me primary custody of Tyler and Lily based on stability and Emma's demonstrated pattern of deception. Emma got visitation every other weekend and 1 evening per week. The assets were split 50-50, which was fair since most of my protected investments were structured before the marriage. The house went to Emma since the kids knew it, but I was given the option to purchase it if I wanted. I didn't. After the hearing, Emma caught me in the parking lot. She was crying. She said she'd ended things with Rob and Karen months ago. She said it had been the worst mistake of her life. She said she'd do anything. I looked at her and felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not satisfaction. Just a deep, tired sadness for the life we'd both lost. I said, Emma, I believe you're sorry. But sorry doesn't undo what you built behind my back for 2 years. I gave you everything I had. You decided it wasn't enough. That's not something a conversation fixes. She asked where I was taking the kids. I told her New Mexico. She started to argue, but I said the custody order allows it, and I've already enrolled Tyler in school. She broke down completely. I told her she could visit any time. I told her I would never keep her children from her. But they were coming with me. I drove back to New Mexico with Tyler, and Lily buckled into the back seat of a new truck I'd bought with cash. Tyler asked if we were going to the ranch with the horses. I said yes. Lily asked if there would be mountains. I said big ones. Hector and Rosa welcomed us like family. They'd already set up the larger cabin for 3. Rosa had stocked the kitchen with enough food for a week. Dean brought over a gentle mare for Tyler to learn on, and a miniature donkey that Lily immediately named Pancake. I started my consulting business from that cabin. I knew construction. I knew project management. I knew the mountain communities now. Within 6 months, I had contracts with 3 ski resorts for off-season renovation work and 2 county governments for rural infrastructure projects. I hired Dean as my first field supervisor. I hired Hector's nephew as a carpenter. The business grew because I showed up, I delivered, and people trusted me. Tyler joined a baseball league in Taos. Lily started kindergarten and came home every day with paintings of mountains and horses. Emma visited once a month. The visits were awkward at first, but the kids needed their mother, and I wasn't going to be the kind of man who used children as weapons. Over time, Emma and I developed something that wasn't friendship exactly, but was civil enough that the kids felt safe. Karen called me once, about a year after the divorce. She said she and Rob had separated. She said the arrangement had destroyed them too. She asked if I could ever forgive her. I told her I was working on it. I meant it. Carrying that anger up and down these mountains had gotten heavy. Letting it go felt less like mercy and more like common sense. The woman who changed everything showed up on a Tuesday in October. Her name was Marta. She was a large animal veterinarian who'd moved to the area from Colorado to take over a retiring vet's practice. She came to the ranch to check on a pregnant mare and stayed for coffee. Then she came back the next week to check on the foal and stayed for dinner. Then she started coming by on Sundays when there was nothing to check on at all. Marta was nothing like Emma. She was direct where Emma had been evasive. She said what she meant and meant what she said. She wore mud boots and no makeup and laughed louder than anyone I'd ever met. Tyler loved her because she let him help with the animals. Lily loved her because Marta could braid hair while identifying horse parasites, which Lily found both disgusting and fascinating. I told Marta everything on our 4th date. We were sitting on the tailgate of my truck watching the sun go down behind Wheeler Peak. I told her about Emma and Rob and Karen. I told her about driving all night. I told her about the cabin and the fence work and the bleeding hands. I told her about hearing my wife's voice in that diner and sitting completely still while she walked past without seeing me. Marta listened to the whole thing. Then she said, "Jake, the man who walked out of that house in Fort Worth isn't the man sitting next to me. You built yourself from scratch out here. That takes more guts than most people have in a lifetime." 2 years after I drove out of Fort Worth with nothing but a box of desk items and $1,400 in cash, I stood on the porch of a house I'd built with my own hands, on 40 acres outside Peñasco. Tyler was in the yard throwing a ball for our dog. Lily was on the porch steps, drawing a picture of Pancake the donkey. Marta was inside making coffee and humming a song I didn't recognize. The Sangre de Cristos were turning gold in the morning light. My sister Karen eventually moved to Santa Fe. We see each other sometimes. It's not what it was, but it's something. Rob disappeared from all our lives, which was probably the best thing he ever did for anyone. Emma remarried a dentist in Fort Worth and by all accounts is happy. She and the kids FaceTime twice a week. Tyler sometimes tells her about the horse he's learning to train, and she listens and smiles and never mentions the mountains with anything but kindness. I still think about that moment in the doorway sometimes, the silence before the phone rang, the way my sister just sat there, the way my wife looked at me and said, "This is actually beautiful if you open your mind to it." And I think about what Hector told me my first week on the ranch, when I was bleeding through my gloves and questioning every choice that had led me to that mountainside. He said, "Mijo, the mountain doesn't care what you were. It only cares what you do today." I've been doing my best every day since, and most days my best is more than enough.